I don't intend to take a sort of full 10 minutes for summing up, but it just seemed that for me there were some key themes that came through from the speakers. I think from the Minister's perspective, that link between tackling climate change and tackling poverty, and the fact that that has been said ever since the introduction of the climate change agenda in government. I certainly welcome that is still very clearly at the top of his agenda, and that the government policies will be the minimum, but there will be an encouragement to others not to fetter their own ambition in moving forward in Wales that tackle that. So the opportunities of using the Planning and Energy Act, and it's worth your knowing what the Planning and Energy Act of 2008 is saying, because it is the opportunity for local authorities to exceed any of the minimum targets in terms of moving forward. And I think a major role for Constructing Excellence Wales and the Hub in terms of taking that agenda forward. Were you terrified by the science from Kevin?
Yep.
Had you seen it before?
Yeah.
Some of you had. It is seriously worrying, because the impact of what Kevin and his colleagues are saying is that the issue is so big that it starts to make people feel that it is impossible to address themselves. But also, we know anthropologically that it's when people get cross enough, when people see the issues clearly enough, when people see the potential effect on their own families, that actually that does generate action. But when you're talking about emissions 60% increase since 1990, then the challenge to government and the role that Rhodri plays in his government is huge. But two key messages from Rhodri: that the government response will be across the whole of government. It's not about an individual minister. There's £70 million of additional funding for energy efficiency has been put in place, and the federal approach will see each portfolio action being developed under policy headings, and the intention is that will start gaining clarity by about the middle of this year, I think you were saying. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, the key thing for us is obviously not to wait to develop another document in 12 months' time, but to come out and identify the actions as and when we can. That'll be a mix of quick wins going on towards more longer-term issues that need to be tackled.
Thank you. And thanks for staying with us today, because it's really important that senior government officials can hear what the sectors are saying and also see the opportunities that are created through Constructing Excellence and the Hub. We've picked up already what Chris Joffe was talking about in terms of the £1.25 million retrofit in 25 years. That's 50,000 homes a year. Currently, under the RBED programme, it's 1,250 a year. So it's 40 times the effort that is actually needed if we're going to deliver on that demonstrates the scale of the challenge. And potentially very exciting work in terms of what a number of you have been saying, linking energy efficiency and value of properties. Francoise is offering you a whole new chance to go and discuss in details the impact of Part L on the 13th and 14th of February of this year. Is that one in North Wales, one in South Wales?
The first one's in Llandudno, the second one's in Cardiff.
Okay, so 13th in Llandudno, 14th in Cardiff. Organised through the Welsh Government?
Constructing Excellence.
Organised through Constructing Excellence. So you know the source. And made the point that there will be mandatory fabric backstops to simplify, and that is a positive response for consultation. I think that's very helpful. People looking for the level playing field in that context. And when will we get the outcomes of the Mott MacDonald work, looking at what can be dealt with by building regulations and what comes from other mechanisms?
I'm not sure about the publication date, but we'll be discussing it with ministers within the next month.
Right. So hopefully, by the time you've got the legislation, will you have that?
No, it'll follow the legislation.
Right.
That's going to be an ongoing piece of work, which we'll be able to set out our plan to deliver the decisions that come out of that. I would hope in the next 3-4 months.
Right. Thanks. And then from Live Eco and the reality of the current delivery, very disappointing for me to hear, having set TAN 22 in place in 2009, so national planning guidance for Wales on supporting sustainable homes has been there since 2009, and the planners you're dealing with should have been delivering according to that. But I mean, two really key issues: the length of time that it takes to get through planning processes. And I know, and of course there is a planning bill going through the Welsh Government at the moment, and that is meant to address a number of those issues. And the second one, which I think is crucially important, and we'll have to see whether some work can be done on this, which is the issue about the banks lending when there are no comparators, or few comparators, and how, as there are more and more of these homes coming onto the market, they can become the comparator, in a sense, for modern housing. So I think there's a challenge about working with the financiers, and not least when we know that, for example, there are a couple of financiers which input to major commercial, very green buildings, which have struggled and have got a lot of their capital out in buildings which aren't actually being sustained commercially either. So some big challenges there. I really like the idea of teaching people to expect a better home. And I think that's a good mantra that we could be going away with. And Richard, I mean, terrifying really, 200% difference between what is predicted and in SAP and the actual usage. So the importance of understanding some key elements. And as I picked up as a non-professional from your presentation, that, for example, that thermal bridges become more and more important as it's squeezed. So as it's squeezed, if you don't get your thermal bridging right, then you're going to have a major problem. And that's just one example. So that basically it's about improving quality throughout the whole process, not just at the end. Otherwise we won't get what we want to achieve. So some very some core messages for us today. And I think we should end also on a note of optimism. I want to quote, and I don't know if anybody saw what book I was looking at, but I'm going to ask you who is saying it and about what. How is this enormous evil ever to be eradicated? If every nation is thus prudentially to wait till the concurrence of all the world shall have been obtained, there is no nation in Europe that has, on the one hand, plunged so deeply into this guilt as Britain, or that is so likely, on the other, to be looked up to as an example, if she would have the manliness to be the first in decidedly renouncing it. How much more justly may other nations point to us and say, why should we abolish this when Great Britain has not abolished it? This is the argument with which we furnish the other nations of Europe if we again refuse to put an end to this. Instead, therefore, of imagining that by choosing to presume on their continuing it, we shall have exempted ourselves from guilt and have transferred the whole criminality to them, let us rather reflect that, on the very principle urged against us, we shall henceforth have to answer for their crimes as well as our own. Who is it? Anybody know? Apart from the man who gave me the book. It's William Pitt the Younger. And what's it about? Slave trade. Let's make sure that we don't generate a future which our children's children's children will hold us to account for our criminality. Thank you very much indeed.